being in the studio with Robert Plant when he says, I can't hit those notes anymore. I'm John Beaudin from Rocky Street Music. Well, Robert Plant told you something, which is one of the many reasons I think he won't do Led Zeppelin. But when you met him, he says he can't sing high anymore.
Yeah, well, like this whole Raising Sand, he's singing down low, and he's got that lower type of tone. Well, as you get old, it just happens, right? And so I was pushing him to sing up high, and he goes, I can't hit those notes anymore. And so I had this one loop that I played that had this really cool, it was Brian Blade, this jazz drummer from New Orleans, that I made a loop of. And then it had this kind of really crazy cool groove against it. So he would sing, and Dan would play like this electric guitar, and it was like really heavy. And he would go up there, and I'm like, yes, higher. And so he was up there in that Led Zeppelin range, and it was amazing. So we had cut 5 songs. We did a couple of low ones, but then there's like 2 tracks that are just like, he's hitting those notes, and it sounds just like Led Zeppelin. I was pretty amazed.
Well, for you being a Zeppelin fan, I mean, for you, and you'd mentioned this before, that you didn't want to remember that time, like I said a while ago. But if you could have asked him anything, did you get a chance to ask that, or what would it have been if you could?
You know what? The thing that I notice about a lot of these artists, from Joni Mitchell to Bob and Neil, the thing is they like to talk about the past, and they like to tell their story. And Robert would just go on rampages, just going on about Bonham. They were here in LA, and then suddenly Bonham's at the whiskey, and it's like he's yelling at the drummer, "You fucking suck!" And he's drunk and all this shit. And he goes, you know what? That Spinal Tap movie, where they're lost under the stage, because that really happened. That was us. We were lost. We couldn't find our way to the stage. And so he had all the stories of the Led Zeppelin. So I didn't need to ask. And so he was just giving it out, as they would come and go like in between, but recording and stuff. But yeah, so it was amazing to hear it coming out of his mouth, because you hear tales and stuff of what they were doing. And so, yeah, so it was incredible stories that he would go on about. And he didn't, his son had died during this tour that they were doing, and he was in Los Angeles, and he got the news. And so they canceled the rest of the tour, and he went back home. And he said, nobody came to visit me except for Bonham. John Bonham was the only guy that came to visit me to see how I was, and the other guys, I never got a phone call from them, and it was kind of odd. And so he just had it was just like, after that there was like I think he just kind of pushed them aside, and just because they weren't there for him when he needed. His son had died. You need some kind of somebody to come and check on you and stuff like that. And yeah, and I think that he just didn't want to reform without Bonham, because Bonham was his best friend, and that's the sound that they make. And even his son, that he's a great drummer, but it's just not the same. So
when people get in a room with you and they know who you are, if they get who you are, like the musicologists, the people who know music, people who read the liner notes, they all, of course, are very familiar with your work. But what do people ask you about the most?
Well, number one is always Bob Dylan. That's forgiven. But I tell these tales while I'm making records too. So and so that's how Listen Up, the book, happened, because I tell all these stories, and one guy in New Orleans, my friend Misha, he owns a studio there, and he goes, "You got to do a book with all these stories. These are somebody's got to put this out." And it's like, I said, "Oh yeah, sure," or whatever. And so while I got cancer, I started to write it all down. And so it started off as, we need a biography from you, or some kind of discography. And so I started writing it down, starting in Hamilton, and how I kind of got the job there. And then suddenly, boom, I had a motorcycle accident. I got the job at the studio, and then met Dan, and then the New Orleans period, with how all that stuff all rolled out. So yeah, so it's pretty, story time is a part of what I do also. So I tell these stories to the musicians, and yeah, sure, a lot of them, they want to know like, what's Iggy Pop like, and they all have their heroes. Like working with U2, I just finished making a record with Iggy Pop, and Bono's like, play that track again. I want to hear that, because that's their hero, Iggy Pop. It's like, so they were taunting me and then Edge was like, oh, I really love that song, Argentina, Miss Argentina. I play that one for him. And so they were like little kids listening to their heroes. It was pretty funny to watch.
Links to both of Mark Howard's books are in the description where you can pick them up. One is the storybook, basically telling the stories about working with all the greats, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Tom Waits, Tragically Hip, and so many more. So we'll have links to both books. Like I said, the first one's the storybook. The second one is basically the pictures book. We've showed you some pictures in the videos. Links to that and a lot more. If you want to help the channel, there are links. Subscribe. Check out our podcast. It's a fairly new podcast. It's doing really, really well, and you can hear a lot of our full interviews on our podcast. Share our videos and podcasts, and like, comment. We'd appreciate that. I'm John Beaudin. This is Rock History Music. Take care of yourself.